Good evening to everyone. It is of my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce to today's very interesting and timely roundtable discussion about the learning and skill trends in the COVID-19 era. Undoubtedly, the coronavirus pandemic and the restrictive measures most of the countries took have a major impact not only to our pockets and health, but to every almost part of our daily works, including the way we interact and communicate. That is mainly not due to the virus, but also to the forceful advancement of technology in every part of our daily life. This rapid advancement dictates an environment in which all of us need to adapt, and that requires a lifelong learning process in acquiring the necessary digital skills in order we will be able to be competent in our daily work and lives. I want to thank the exceptional lineup of our speakers today who will participate in a very fruitful conversation with the help and moderation of Mrs. Venetia Kousia, Chair of the Employment Committee of our Chamber, whom I also thank. Also, I want to thank our media sponsor, Epihiro GR. Before I conclude, I want to remind all that today's roundtable discussion is part of a series of multi-thematic conversations under the general title AmCham GR Digital Talks and Events that will be held until July 20. Thank you very much for your participation, and I will now pass the mic to my dear friend, Venetia.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear students, good afternoon and welcome to all of you. As you heard, I'm Venetia Kousia. I will moderate the panel, and this is another event addressed to all those interested in the trends and the skills in the labor market. But this one is remotely. I hope that we will continue to have remote meetings and events. The only condition is that we are going to select these meetings, not to be forced. COVID-19 has abruptly reminded us that the two most important factors of our lives are vulnerable and are not for granted. Both health and work need our daily care and appreciation, as their condition may easily change dramatically. We have been talking about the world of work and that it is changing for more than the last 2 decades at least, due to globalization, demographics, fourth industrial revolution, the invasion of the fourth industrial revolution. But I believe that we have been mostly observers of the changes, and our productivity was hindered by the astonishment of the speed of evolution. We have been reacting speechless. However, COVID, such a tiny virus, has succeeded in energizing us, in pushing us from inertia and become more creative and show our creativity in a different way, reinvent the frameworks that we have been thinking of. Invent the new boxes, I would say. Now the new boxes have been shaped. To come to our territory, the job market, it is evident that it has undergone an earthquake. I would say a tsunami, larger than a tsunami. The whole economy started questioning the positive effects of globalization, making us entering phase 2 of globalization, the fragmented globalization. However, the 3 main undisputable changes in the world of work that have been observed are that the place that we carry out our work is now in doubt. This has repercussions. Remote working has invaded our lives, so the outcome and the hours will be determined in new territories. Mr. Pouliakas, who is expert on skills and labor market at CEDEFOP, will explain to us more about remote work and who has been mostly influenced and affected by that. The second change is that there is a severe damage in the social contract of workers, as the safety net expected to provide workers a safety has disappeared, especially to those of the gig economy. But this is a huge topic, and it needs an extensive discussion among all three parts of the market: public, private, and government. And the third change are the skills, that they constantly change. We are supposed to have them in order to navigate and thrive, not just to navigate safely, you wish. And we have with us Mrs. Litrivi, who is the CEO from EOPEP, where she will explain to us the role of this organization and what is the relation with the remote exams and the skills that we required and the lifelong learning. We have with us Mrs. Mendrek, who is the director of Global Group Maximus, which is an HR company. She will help us understand what the other communities outside Greece are doing. She will share the knowledge with us on success stories that she has come across, or the lessons that we would like to share. We have with us Mr. Harry Patrinos, who is a practice manager on education from the World Bank, who will help us understand the role of training, adult training, in this ever-changing skills evolution. We have missed Mr. Pouliakas, but he is here. We want him in the picture as well, George, who is the expert who will talk us about remote working, the repercussions, and some, because they have also done a study. But let's begin with Mrs. Litrivi, who will start explaining about EOPEP. Just to mention that we will excuse Mrs. Litrivi as she might leave a little bit earlier, but she has already told us before. So, Mrs. Litrivi, please explain to us what EOPEP is doing and what we should expect.
Dear distinguished guests, dear hosts, it is an honor to be a member of this roundtable on such a topical issue, the learning and skills trends in the COVID-19 era. Dear Ms. Kousia, dear all, further to your kind words, I would like to preface my speech with a remark that unfortunately, given today's prior planning, I have a commitment, as you said. As a result, I should leave before 6. So with your permission, I will leave a little after I have read out my speech. My speech is presented in 2 axes, not only EOPEP's mission, but also the changes that the pandemic brought about in the world of employment, training, and education. The OECD declared the global GDP growth could fall this year to 1.5%, compared to the 2.9 rate predicted before the coronavirus outbreak. Central banks in more than 50 countries have cut interest rates to try to strengthen their economies, and many governments have already started preparing extraordinary budgets and recovery plans. Recent projections from the World Trade Organization foretell an economic downturn and job losses worse to the ones happened to the financial crisis of 2008. According to the ILO, nearly 25 million jobs could be lost worldwide due to the coronavirus pandemic. The question is, would these workers keep their jobs in the long term if it wasn't for the pandemic? How would they be affected by automation and technology developments? Even before the current crisis, changing technologies and new ways of working were disrupting jobs, and we know it. In 2017, the McKinsey Global Institute estimated that as many as 375 million workers, or 14% of the global workforce, would have to switch occupations or acquire new skills by 2030 because of automation and artificial intelligence. In a recent McKinsey Global Survey, 87% of executives said that they were experiencing skill gaps in the workforce or expected them within a few years. Apparently, the coronavirus pandemic has made the question more urgent, but the problem was alive before the pandemic. Workers across industries must figure out how they can adapt to rapidly changing conditions, and companies have to learn how to match those workers to new roles and activities. This dynamic is about more than remote working, if I may, or the role of automation and artificial intelligence. It's about how leaders can reskill and upskill the workforce to deliver new business models in the post-pandemic era. Upskilling and reskilling are the key words. To meet this challenge, companies should double down on their learning budgets and commit to reskilling. This will also result in strengthening companies for future disruptions. We have to be ready now. We know it. The learning landscape has changed in ways that will foster teaching new skills to employees wherever they may be. COVID-19 has accelerated the adoption of fully digitized approaches to recreate the best of in-person learning through live video and social sharing. This means greater personalization, thus greater effectiveness. As the containment phase of the crisis gradually recedes, to my mind, there are 5 kinds of skills needed for the employees to be efficient and effective in the post-pandemic era. Digital skills, cognitive skills to ensure that critical players can respond to the need of redesign and innovation, social and emotional skills to ensure effective collaboration, especially now that they should be strong despite distance, adaptability and resilience skills to thrive during an evolving business situation, and critical thinking. During the pandemic, we have seen a spike in fake news and misinterpretation of data and studies as leaders, businesses, and governments are trying to shift blame and divert attention. All in all, as you can realize, the job market of the future will need unique human qualities. These skills aren't, at least yet, ready to get an algorithmic shape or be the brain of a robot. As far as the OPEP is concerned, so let's get in the second act of my speech. Let me tell you some things about the mission of the organization. OPEP is the national agency for the certification of qualifications and vocational guidance, an organization investing on better quality and more efficient and reliable lifelong learning services in Greece, linking with the open market and responding to the needs of the society. The core of our mission is geared towards linking VET, vocational education and training, with labor markets needs, upgrading citizens' professional qualifications, reinforcing their employment perspectives, thus strengthening social cohesion. OPEP develops and implements comprehensive national systems for the accreditation of non-formal and informal learning and provides scientific and technical support in designing and implementing the vocational guidance national policy. OPEP aims at quality assurance in inputs, outputs, and vocational in terms of learning outcomes, and vocational guidance and counseling services. COVID-19 forced our organization, like many other organizations and companies' employees, to change the way they work almost overnight. OPEP, that is self-funded, and I have to mention it, and understaffed, managed to resist pretty well the pandemic turbulence. It is said that the worst of times brings out the best in people. As it happens, this is true of organizations as well, and this is the case with the OPEP during the pandemic. We managed to organize teleworking within 10 days, offering remote access to all information systems, which were upgraded, offering laptops to the majority of the staff, giving email access to the citizens for the support of our services, and so on. 3 days before the lockdown, I myself had a meeting with the heads of the departments, and deploying my plan with the aim to protect the personnel and help containing the virus for the community. Almost everyone looked at me as if I was drunk. Now, 3 months later, almost everyone wants to get back to teleworking mode. In fact, they proved to be much more productive and apparently with less effort. Further, we managed to transform EOPEP to one-stop shop as far as the exams procedure for the certification of initial training is concerned. For over 11,300 graduates of Institutes of Vocational Training, IEC, exams which are about to start mid-July. Concluding, I can see 2 points that I want to highlight. First, adapting employees' skills and roles to the post-pandemic ways of working will be the key to building operating model resilience. And second, there is only one way to remain relevant in post-coronavirus reality: commit to a lifetime of learning. Someone that is going to succeed in a post-coronavirus world will need to be able to adapt to ever-evolving workplaces and have the ability to continuously update and refresh their skills. Thank you once again for your kind invitation and your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Litrivi. I have to say that you impressed me. I hope that you hear me now for the good words. Congratulations.
You want me to mute the microphone? No, it's okay. Sorry.
No, I have unmuted. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Do you hear me?
Hear
okay.
You.
So, okay, I have it unmuted, but I don't know the devil of technology behind the scenes, what he's doing. Congratulations. I fully agree that companies need employees to be adapting in the changing environment in order to build resilience, as you said. And the only certain is that we start learning as soon as we start reading and listening, I would say, not even reading. The moment that we start listening and understanding, we start learning, and we stop learning when we die. And this shouldn't be something as a task difficult, and we should enjoy learning. This is up not only to us, but to the educators. I have also heard from you that the employees want more to telework. This leads me
remotely.
Prefer to work remotely. This leads me to Konstantinos Pouliakas to give us some ideas of who wants to work remotely, who has the ability to work, because according to research of Eurofound, Greece was before the last, it was not the last, but one before the last of all the countries that worked remotely. And I think we live in a bubble. We are talking among each other, and we make, I don't know, I mean, we judge, but please tell us, Mr. Pouliakas, what is going on teleworking a little bit. And because as I have promised, we were expecting to start with a general question that of you need to reply, but since teleworking is so much important, introduce us a little bit in that and go on.
Okay, so good afternoon from me as well. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for extending the invitation also to CEDEFOP, the European Center for the Development of Vocational Training. As you mentioned, and as Mrs. Litrivi mentioned previously, we are living in extraordinary times, and one of the major manifestations of the COVID-19 crisis has obviously been the need to work remotely. Estimates, range from around the fact that around 40 to 50% of employees during the COVID lockdown were forced essentially to work from home. And of course, businesses which didn't manage to adapt and didn't manage to find a means to ensure that remote work arrangements were sustained, those were the ones which evidence has shown they bore the brunt of the impact of the COVID crisis in terms of accentuated job losses, business closures, and so on and so forth. I'm happy in the sense that I've been very recently, also together with colleagues at Eurofound and the European Commission, been analyzing the issue of teleworking. And I've especially been analyzing and looking in depth into the issue of teleworking in Greece in particular. And of course, we don't have data which can give you much insight into whether or not teleworking is going to remain as a prevalent, predominant mode of working in the medium term. That remains to be seen. We don't have that data yet. What we do have, and the data that I have analyzed, is 10 years of data from the European Labour Force Survey on what was happening before the COVID crisis in Greece. And what do we know? We know that Greece was a laggard in terms of remote work, in terms of working from home. The share of employees who were working from home, it was only 4% of adult EU employees who were working from home, as opposed to an EU average of 14%. We know that, as you mentioned, people who work remotely do tend to be more privileged, do tend to be more highly skilled, do tend to work for more innovative type of businesses. It's usually people working in professional activities, or also people working in the education sector. A very high proportion of workers who were working from home prior to the COVID crisis were actually employed in the teaching profession. I think I was astonished by the fact that the evidence also points to the fact that you would expect specific groups of people to benefit from teleworking in order to be able to accommodate and cope with the COVID crisis. And in fact, the data shows that these type of individuals, these type of workers who would be in most need of remote working arrangements are the ones who received it the least, at least before the crisis ensued. So I'm always surprised by the finding that in particular, females with young children in Greece have the lowest probability of being engaging in remote forms of work. And of course, as I mentioned, lower educated individuals have a very low probability of receiving or of being beneficiaries of remote types of work. I've been trying to engage in a hypothetical exercise, and this is something which economists are doing worldwide now. They're trying to conceptualize what share of jobs could potentially be teleworkable. So for instance, a very famous study in the US by Dingle and has shown that around 36%, if I'm not mistaken, of US jobs are teleworkable. And we try to measure this by deconstructing jobs, by looking at their characteristics. You know, for instance, whether or not a job involves the use of physical equipment, whether or not a job involves interaction, a lot of social engagement with other people. So by engaging in a similar exercise for Greece, I have found that around 35 to 36% of all EU jobs could potentially become teleworkable. So contrast this to the 4%, which was a tangible share of people working from home in 2018, about a year and a half, 2 years before the COVID crisis. And you will realize that there is scope for around 800,000 Greek adult employees to be moved to the remote space. I conclude by saying that, of course, this doesn't mean that everyone should be pushed towards teleworking. Obviously, there are major benefits to working in an organization. There are major benefits in interacting with your colleagues, with your co-workers. We've been discussing about the importance of skill development and of learning. And we know from other evidence, including all of the work that Sedefop has been doing, that the major driver and motivator for informal learning tends to be your workplace, tends to be the type of interaction that you're having with your supervisors, with your colleagues, with your co-workers. So the point I'm trying to make is that a balance will have to be struck in the post-COVID era, where we are definitely ensuring that workers, employees, businesses are benefiting from the additional facility of remote work, but we need to do so in a manner where we will not sacrifice the advantages that you tend to have when you're working in close interaction with colleagues, close interaction with your co-workers, and when you're engaging in a vast amount of informal organizational learning.
Thank you, Konstantinos. I would like to ask you, Anya and Harry, do you think that employers were expecting such a disruption? Have they proven to be flexible? We have heard that the employees at the OPEP were listening to Ms. Litrivi 2 or 3 days before the event like she has been drunk. I might say that some employers must be like, I mean, they caught up unprepared. What is your opinion and your experience, Anya?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be speaking with such a distinguished panel. I come from an operational background. So Maximus runs public services on behalf of state and federal and local governments. And we work with the most disadvantaged populations, people far from the labor market. And then we work with employers who we help to get our job seekers into sustained employment. And one thing that I have noticed is, despite the fact that they were taken aback, that they were surprised, and I think, you know, we've heard that a number of times that life has changed quite abruptly to everyone, from a government level all the way to a small shop owner. Some of the employers embrace the change. And what we have managed to do is engage in a dialogue and a conversation on introducing digital tools in helping them either upskill or reskill or assess to start with their employees. Some of them, we work in Italy and the northern part of the country where we have most of our operations. As you know, that was struck the most in terms of impact of COVID. But employers were still trying to find a way of looking at their workforce, take a stock, take a almost step back and see where they need to be going in the future. And we engaged with them through various of activities, including the virtual job fairs. And initially, when we did the job fairs in our offices, you know, people were a little bit skeptical, some came, some did not. When we had a Zoom with a number of different rooms and employers and our job seekers and the interaction, we were blown away by the spontaneity of the discussions, by the openness of some of our employers, and almost, in a sense, lack of inhibitions of both the job seekers and employers to ask questions, to you know, find out about concerns that both sides may have. So we acted as a sort of a intermediary in that respect. But and having done one, we had so many requests from our local employers to continue that. And actually, successfully, we have managed to support people into employment. So I think in a situation where you feel quite desperate, when someone is offering you a way of continuing your business or a way of looking at it in a more brighter light. I think many of our employers that we worked with and our job seekers embrace that.
This is true for smaller employers as well. I mean, for all sizes of employers.
I agree, and I think even more so for smaller employers. When you think about someone who runs a local business, they don't have the human resources, they don't have the full back office, they quite often don't invest in upskilling their staff. In Northern Italy, vast majority of businesses are almost family run. If you think Veneto and Lombardia and Emilia-Romagna, there's sort of a family history in having a business. But those people have no skills to upskill their staff. Quite often they are too busy to run the day-to-day operations. They don't have time to think about what's available there, what sort of funding is there, how we can support our people. And yes, a lot of people, and as you know, the statistics have been hit with being on furlough, putting sort of almost as in a parking space. But some businesses use that time to rethink their model, to take a stock of the skills that they have. And from a government perspective, the challenge is, how do we support employers to have employees who are technologically employable and can continue working? And how do we support job seekers who've already been in precarious situation before the COVID to become technologically employable? So I think there's a whole host of activities that and efforts that we have seen had a positive impact.
Mr. Patrinos, you are all over the globe from what you are seeing and following up. And I think you have seen some similarities and some differences. Can you share with us your extremely interesting experiences?
Yes, thank you. I think from where I live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and what I see in this country, I tend to agree with what Ms. Mendrick observed in terms of employers' responses. Quite, no one expected this, but quite a rapid and flexible response to providing services where they could, protecting employees and trying to ease them to employment. But I also oversee many countries in Europe and Central Asia where the response has been more chaotic. I would say not because of the employers, but because of government announcements and whether they saw it as a pandemic or as something temporary, whether they were open to the health consequences. So the responses were quite different throughout Europe and Central Asia, and to this day. There are still governments that are not, I would say, treating it the same way that others are. So this has led to confusion, of course, for employers in terms of do we come to work? Are we safe? Should we change these? But of course, some countries have been excellent in terms of the communication and the support they give, and therefore employers are able to practice safe business operations and trying to protect the employees. I think this has been a devastating outcome for many lower income countries that don't have the abilities to safely social distance and to change employment practices rapidly. A lot of information and misinformation. I think someone already mentioned the misinformation that's extended. I think we were seeing this before. We're seeing a lot more now. So this is why I said there's a lot of confusion in many of the countries where I work. Of course, we're seeing this from a distance because, like everyone else here, our employer went into lockdown very early in March to enforce the social distancing. And our productivity, of course, hasn't declined. And what has been the most surprising To me, in terms of responses, I work in the education sector. This has been very rapid responses in most countries where we work in terms of the school closures and then the mitigation measures, meaning the distance education, and how innovative these schools and ministries of education have been with very limited resources and a lack of knowledge of what to do. We've never had such a pandemic. But for many people, this crisis will lead to a rethinking about how they get the skills, how employers reskill and respond to the ongoing, I would say, potential for lockdowns and closures, and how this will affect productivity going forward.
We have been discussing about how easily, let's say, they have, how fast they have adapted to the new remote working model, and they are going to rethink their process models. Were they ready to handle the psychological aspect of the employees or of the employers? I mean, we usually talk about how productive or how close to the clients or how close to the teachers to the pupils. What about the psychology of all these people, that they have changes in their daily lives? There is a lot of uncertainty. Even the mothers with small children, that they are less probable to work remotely. I think if you are a mother with a small child that doesn't go to the nursery, doesn't go to primary school or whatever, and depending on the area of your house, you do have a problem to work at home. Let's be honest. It is not only the skills that we lack, that we definitely lack from all sides, from all the sides of the triangle. Please share with me, and Mrs. Litrivi, if you want to interrupt, the psychology, to intervene, the psychology, Kostas as well, please tell me a little bit about that before proceeding to the skills and the e-learning, etc., because psychology is part of the wish to continue to learn. In my opinion, in my humble opinion. Who starts first? I give you the option. Kostadine?
I can have a go, even though I admittedly have not really looked deeply into the psychological implications of the COVID crisis. But one thing is for certain for me, and this is linked to the whole discussion about the reskilling and the upskilling, because as you're fully aware of, one instinctive reaction of many governments and many stakeholders during the COVID crisis was to highlight that, with 200 million hours available, as was quantified by the ILO, of free time that people had, what are they supposed to do with all of this time? So obviously, the one defense mechanism is a psychological one, where people had to obviously get to terms with the situation, be patient, and in this respect, the type of adaptability skills that Mrs. Litrivi mentioned at the beginning are extremely crucial, to be able to tackle and mitigate with such an occurrence. But the other argument was, if you have so much time at your hand, why don't you try to invest more in your learning? So in that respect, I have a couple of comments to make, which is that firstly, there does seem to be a positive association between people being at home and then them making the decision to invest in more continuous learning. Okay, this can be potentially explained by the fact that obviously when you're have alternative work arrangements, you have to go to your workplace, various barriers, time constraints, and so on and so forth may inhibit you from taking the decision. It also is the case that by working online, you also get increasingly exposed to all of this plethora of learning materials, online learning materials, and therefore it may have spurred and incentivized people to say, okay, I'm going to start some of these online massive online open courses, and so on and so forth. But as you mentioned, there are tremendous difficulties in relation to being able to stick to it. And obviously, if you have young children at home and there isn't a provision of childcare and creche, that magnifies the problem. The other element has to do with what we knew also before the COVID crisis, which is that when you're talking about people who are unemployed, especially people who may have been in the type of industries where you can say they were affected the most, and where prospects that they will be able to quickly go back to work were quite bad. So we know, that in the hospitality industry, the prospects are not that good. In the wholesale and retail industry, the prospects are not as positive as in other occupations where people potentially were less affected by the COVID crisis. So what do we know? We know that when people are in such a situation where they are at a distance from the labor market, managing to design training and reskilling programs which are effective is a function of both the design of targeted programs which are really identifying people's skill gaps, but not only that. These programs should give a huge emphasis on the psychological support mechanism and on the guidance mechanism. Spending a lot of time with people, talking about their expectations, talking about the potential dismay that they may be feeling. Unless you go through and pass that first hurdle, the psychological hurdle, then any type of initiatives that you may be trying to put forth to convince people to do more learning, let alone online learning, is very likely to just lead to disengagement.
I can understand it. The issue is what we really do, Anya, because we say what it is missing, and I totally agree, because you cannot get devoted to learning unless your psychology is stable. But what do we do really in practice and in real life, and how we close this gap? Because there are also studies that they are talking about the distance that they have paved, let's say, towards labor market for those that they are out of the labor market. Anya, what can you share with us on that?
These are really good questions, Venetia. Thank you for them. I agree that the emotional well-being and the state of mind of job seekers is further impacted when pandemic strikes. They have already, as I mentioned, been away from the labor market and may have experience in industries that are disappearing or that have been heavily impacted. So they are faced with a prospect of not going back to their industry. They may not have transferable skills to move quickly into the new industry. And unfortunately, there will be a whole new cohort of job seekers who will be at some point laid off by failing employers. And we know that in the case of furlough in many countries, in Italy, the Casa Integrazione, which is again the furlough scheme, the question is that there will be huge numbers of job seekers coming into the unemployment market. So we have decided, in order to keep people motivated to learn, to be engaged, and to engage in, discovering and strengthening their, for example, transferable skills, we have designed a well-being check-in sessions. And we have piloted those sessions across a number of different projects, starting in Washington, D.C., where we worked with a very disadvantaged population. We work with youth attached to criminal justice system. We work in Italy with long-term unemployed. We work in the UK. So we have created a calendar of well-being check-in sessions where our case managers are available just to talk to those job seekers. They can drop in, they can, share any anxieties, any challenges that they may face, and that sort of keeps them attached with us, but also help us think through what sort of training design for them we should be putting in place. What are the gaps that they may have, and also we're looking at the employer population and what they are needing and what they will be needing once we start reopening the businesses, because we all know there is no grand opening of businesses. So there may be slow steps in many countries to open the economy, open the markets. A lot of employers will be still unsure of recruitment at a scale or at all. So we're trying to sort of pilot all sorts of different activities, both for our job seekers to keep them motivated, to make them learn something different, to make them look optimistically into the
I have heard from someone who is in the business that we are talking about. There is the possibility to keep them optimistic up to an extent and to try to reskill them. But since there are no openings, this optimism will fall down. I would like you, Anya, to help us on that, and Mr. Patrinos as well to comment on that, because you are very experienced on adult education and how people can adapt in this that we are talking, right?
So it depends again on the geography we're in, on the context and the type of program that we're running. In Italy, we have managed to put people into employment, even if it's just a temporary employment, in terms of delivery drivers. Surprisingly to me, but not surprisingly to my Italian colleagues, the tobacco shops were open, and we had our job seekers going into employment into tobacco shops because you need to buy cigarettes or other products. We were able to support federal governments across the US and other countries in scaling up our call center capabilities. Therefore, being able to support our job seekers in programs in getting into, working actually for us or on behalf of state government in California to offload their call centers. So we're trying to sort of look for opportunities to keep them engaged, and there might not be the dream jobs, there might not be the, long-term career ambitions, but if we can keep them sort of moving closer and getting new skills. In the UK, the Tesco supermarkets were hiring something around 20,000 drivers because everybody was panic online shopping, and somebody needed to deliver the goods to people. There was suddenly a need for people operating websites and web chat and multi-channel centers in response to increased calls to government programs or institutions and so on. So we're trying to find those gaps that we can at least help plug in for a period of time.
Okay, Mr. Patrinos, what's your opinion about that? I mean, about psychology, fixing, and the willingness to learn, relearn, get involved in adapting.
Yes, thank you. I think the current crisis does bring to the fore the preparedness of people to work under these alternative arrangements. And I think the social, emotional stress has been tremendous for people. And I think that the skills that will allow some to do well during these times are also the same skills that we're allowing people to do well during the technological revolution or our future of the workforce with more automation. But most people are educated in a system that is both terminal and not teaching some of these skills. We are in education systems that are terminal. You complete primary school in order to qualify for secondary school, you write an exam, you get into university, and then you go to work. that's your education training. But we've known and people have professed that lifelong learning, which is, I believe, the only response to this crisis and to the fourth industrial revolution, or whatever you want to call the technological change that's taking place. I want to quote Nobel Prize-winning economist Gary Becker, who said that we've known that investing in skills throughout a lifetime is important, yet our schools haven't changed since the times of Socrates. I would agree with that, except in the sense that Socrates was actually doing lifelong learning way back then, and somehow the schools that we have ended this quest for knowledge and change and building the skills that you need to self-actualize. A few ideas about why lifelong learning was important will become even more important. We know that even before COVID, in the United States alone, 120 million workers were in need of training. This is a study by IBM. But half of the businesses had no skills development strategy in place. So if they didn't have it before COVID, they certainly don't have it now. Where do you get these skills, especially with the lockdown? The other thing is education system was designed for a relatively long period of education and then a rather short life. But we know lifespan in the United States will reach 95 for females, 90 for males by 2050. That's not too long from now. So can you really educate someone for life with the current education system if they're going to live to 90? And 1/3 of babies born in 2012 in the United States will live to be 100. That's a long life of work, yet they don't have the system in place that will allow them to learn, relearn, and continue to prosper. So how do we use this crisis to change the education and training system? There are two difficult channels. One is the public, and the other one is the private. If you look at the public sector, the ministries of education, they are the custodians of the current education system. Very difficult to affect change in that bureaucracy, and that will require something like the pandemic, unfortunately, and a demand from citizens that education systems change. The other is the market. I was looking at the spending on education and training over the last several years. The two fastest growing areas of spending on education and training are test preparation and e-gaming. Test preparation very much acknowledges that the system of terminal education is the one we have, and people are investing in this. Get that credential to get into the right school, and that's what we expect of our systems. E-gaming, great for entertainment, education gaming, but e-learning systems, which are in big demand today, and I think will play a bigger role going forward. But the issue that will continue to affect us going forward is that I agree with Constantino that people are interested in learning more, and some people have taken advantage of the lockdown to do this, but can those skills get recognized in the labor force? Very difficult for employers to ascertain if you have the skills. We need some kind of system of verification. And how do we do this outside of the regular school system? Micro-credentials, whatever you want to call them, but they need to be recognized, and we need a system of verification. And I think that's a role for technology to play. And already we were seeing before COVID the emergence of companies that were giving us digital tools to almost unhackable tools to verify the learning that might take place outside of formal education systems. But until we have that in place, it'd be very difficult for employers to know what people have learned, and for employees to be able to show their credentials, at least their credentials to get a foot in the door.
How is it to change the system that we have created? I mean, I was reading Harari the other day saying about the education that since the Industrial Revolution has been based on getting marks, levels. Before that, they were saying just you passed or you didn't pass. So I become successful because I am a good student. I pass my exams with high marks, and then I go on and on. How are we going to change such a system since we have been brought up in such a system? I mean, it needs very courageous decisions to take. One. And then, is the government going to support so that companies train their employees? Who is going to pay? Because everybody says, in my opinion, I mean, the majority say they need training, but the two main problems are that we do not have enough money and we do not have enough time to train our people. These are the two excuses for companies that they are, allow me to say, they use the lack of training as an excuse for not being courageous to change the processes. Who is going to comment first? Because the financing, I got it from a question that we have received about who is going to pay for the, and then there is another interesting question that we will take it a little bit later. Constantine, I see you willing to reply.
Yes, of course. I mean, the discussion and the discourse about who pays for training is ongoing. And I think, for the rest of our lives, we're always going to be coming back to this question. I mean, I think, particular countries have given the answer to this. The share needs to be shared. The financial cost needs to be borne by both enterprises and also individuals. In no way can it only be an individual responsibility. I think, there had been a trend over time, to push and put the burden of financing training increasingly towards individuals. But, countries such as Germany and other such countries which have very good and very mature systems where both companies and employees are sharing in the cost of training, are co-designing training. They have, I think, and they continuously show the path. They show how one should be pursuing in this area. In our country, unfortunately, sometimes it is used as an excuse, and I would say it is an excuse because we do know that Greece is a laggard, and it's really falls quite behind other EU countries in terms of the commitment of enterprises in training. I think, it's multifaceted. It also depends on the type of support that the government provides. It also depends on the type of programs that are being devised. But usually whenever the argument is raised that in Greece we have a huge amount of small and medium-sized enterprises, and therefore, how can managers find time to invest in training when they have to deal with the everyday issue of survival? I mean, the same goes for all EU countries. SMEs are the majority of firms in all EU countries. It's an issue of commitment. It's an issue of governments working together with businesses to be able to co-design these programs. It's an issue of being able to ensure that businesses are also heard, and of course that managers themselves within these small and medium-sized businesses invest in their own learning and their own training, because we know that managerial competence is one of the key determinants which then trickles down to the overall strategy that organizations adopt in relation to the investment in the continuing lifelong learning of their own staff.
First of all, Greek employers have to trust more professional managers to allow them to study and acquire leadership skills, that they are much more important now because in Greece we do have this problem as well. And we also have a problem of very, very small-sized firms. I mean, okay, all of them are small, under 50, but in Greece, the majority is not just under 50, is under 10 persons, 9 persons in the company. And I suppose that you in the question or in the solution of the problem, should collectivities be involved and regional chambers of commerces along with companies? I mean, it's a multi-stakeholder answer that needs to be answered.
If I can just quickly get back to that, I'm sorry, Harry, if I interrupted you. The issue that most firms in Greece are micro-sized firms is actually why exactly these type of firms should be investing in more skill development, both of the owners and of their individuals, because we know that it's only via trying to engage and trying to find a niche and a competitive advantage that micro-sized firms can actually ensure that when they are faced with such shocks, such as the COVID crisis, that they can actually manage to survive over the long term. And the additional issue that you raised is exactly that. This is how the education and training system is changing in general, namely that we are observing that vocational education and training systems are becoming multi-stakeholder, and you're having a plethora of new actors who are potentially becoming education and learning providers. So coming back to the issue that we were discussing on psychology, on the health implications, we have observed in recent years that exactly when you have civil society organizations, local communities being more and fully engaged in the design of customized and tailored training programs, the possibilities of having the engagement of firms and having more effective outcomes for employees are maximized.
Mr. Patrinos?
Yeah, thank you. On the financing question, I think Konstantinos speaks well about what we know about training and enterprise engagement. And I won't speak about Greece, but in general, I think there's, for any country, for any society, there's 3 sources of finance of training. One is private spending, what people pay out of pocket. The second is government spending, private, including employers as well. And then the third is future earnings. And I think right now
Sorry, what is the third one?
The third is future earnings.
Future.
So the most of our training systems are either from enterprises, which, and if they're small enterprises, tend to tell you that they're not happy with the quality of the education systems. You give them incentives to train. They typically don't, because they fear employees will leave or they'll get poached. Governments are certainly not going to have resources in the coming recession to drastically increase spending on training. So what does that leave us? Leaves us with future earnings. The way that Australia and the UK, New Zealand, and several other countries finance their higher education system is through future earnings of the graduates collected through taxation. So when you have a downturn in your economy, people don't pay. There's no risk to the individual taking on this debt. Much better system than traditional loans. It also means that you have created a new source of financing that doesn't exist. This would help us through these crises, because it wouldn't create a disincentive for the trainees or the institutions to provide the training, and it will continue to give us a future stream of earnings that's much easier to collect in the traditional systems. That would be a response in any case to creating more resources for education training. But during these downturns in the economy, it definitely becomes the only fair way, equitable way to promote education training. When Australia adopted this for higher education, they had one of the lowest enrollment rates of all OECD countries. I think today it's one of the highest, primarily because of this system. I also think that this has to be considered in the case of lifelong learning, because it was difficult enough to predict training needs today, we certainly won't be able to do this in the future, given the rapid changes in enterprises, in the economy, the technological revolution, and people's long life that will require that they train and retrain. We need to put incentives in place. But I would say that reconsidering the financing model is the right time during this recession, and it's a good recipe for considering how we can expand training throughout the lifetime.
And you are talking about those who are current in the labor market. What about those who are outside the labor market?
I think it works for all. I think the idea that you see an opportunity to increase your skills for future productivity and pay. I think we had the case where the returns to education, the wage benefits to more education training were increasing pre-COVID. I suspect they will continue to increase because we know from past recessions and crises that those with better education outcomes tend to do better during crises. We know in the Greek financial crisis, those with higher education tended to remain employed more than those with less education and tended to earn more. So there will be a demand for more education. The question is, how do you pay for it? I don't think governments will be able to expand drastically what they spend on education. So we do need new sources. If it's all up to individuals, that's very inequitable. So we do need a system that allows people to borrow against the future in a way that protects them if the economy doesn't do well.
And this has to do, okay, the governments are not going to have many more money. We need to have to find new sources, as you said, and this is extremely, I mean, it's an idea. It's news in the town. What about the individual learning accounts? Because I have in my mind, how do we get the people accountable? Because no matter who pays, I mean, one issue is the excuse that I don't have the money as a government or as an employer, and you provide this solution that it is fantastic and it can help. The other is how much committed I am. And Anya, I'm referring to you that you have been talking to me about the individual learning accounts, and there is some doubt and dispute there. Are they a panacea or just a small solution to the problem?
Well, that's a tricky question, and I think I certainly don't have the answer to that. But before I touch on the learning accounts, I just want to echo what's already been said around the need to create an ecosystem where we engage all stakeholders and learners to co-design the training, the learning from the courses that are needed here and now, and the courses that might be needed in the future. And if the learners, both whether they are employees or they are job seekers, the Chamber of Commerce's, the businesses, but also the government institutions. So they are actively participating, the local municipalities who may have funding or may have add funding to it, really understand what the needs are of all the different stakeholders, and co-designing that curriculum. I think it's really important. And we've seen in terms of apprenticeship how that works in a number of different countries. Germany is probably one of those most quoted, and the Italians are trying to sort of look at it and come up with a solution that will work for them. But I think we need to go away from people collecting certificates and having a portfolio of something that they can, frame and put on the wall, to something that will give them the skills, the knowledge, and the confidence that they can navigate the labor market. And I'm talking about the unemployed, because this is mainly who we work with, but also in terms of funding in Italy, it's quite close to me, because we started our operations 3 weeks before COVID. and we're in the middle of a startup in Sweden. So we're experiencing starting operations, working with people who are out of the labor market in the middle of pandemic, and 2 countries, from my perspective, that are handling it quite differently. So, but the Italians have the funding that comes from employers who pay into a common pot, and then they can use that to retrain that. And that was used usually, in a way, here is a training, I'm selling it to you, or I'm going to give it, deliver it to you, whether you need that or not. And quite often employers, as it has already been mentioned, in many countries, small and micro, just didn't have time to understand what really is needed, so they would take that. On the individual learning accounts, I really struggle, because in some places we've seen this kind of works when people are engaged, when there is a well-designed model, but also people take responsibility in their own hands, and they see how this can advance that. It's a difficult one, I would say, and I think there is no one answer on this, and I'm sure Mr. Patrinos or Konstantinos Polgakis have more to add on this from a research perspective. We haven't really had very successful projects where people had just individual learning accounts that were, but we also work on behalf of governments. So, quite often when you talk about working with people who are far from the labor market, the assumption is that we're going to support them into employment, and once they are at work for a period of time, they're able to re-engage fully on the labor market, and they can take life in their own hands, in a sense. So there's also quite often, shall I say, short-sightedness in how programs are currently designed.
Okay, we need to find a new business model. We need to redesign altogether to produce a learning ecosystem, I would say, and I can understand. Mr. Patrinos, how can we convince employers and employees, for different reasons, of course, to trust in this e-learning, e-skilling, lifelong learning? Because, and stop having this diploma-ready people. They are adding, especially the last 2 decades, everybody has a master that he or she doesn't even remember why she decided to study it, just to promote the career. And they trust that they will hire him instead of having some other skills, soft skills or hard skills, depending on the gaps. We are learning, but in order to learn, Anya has said it before, to learn what you need to learn and bridge the gap, you need to be assessed first. So assessment, we don't do, we don't believe. We learn, we don't believe in non-typical, especially in Greece. Non-typical education doesn't have a lot of value. Please clarify how we can change perceptions, mentalities, because I want to come up in trust as a next question.
Yeah, great question, and I do remember the early experience with the individual learning accounts. I think they were done at a time in the 1990s when the technology wasn't there for the verification, and there were questions about the integrity of the systems. I think today they could be done in a way that avoids some of these issues. And I would say the answer to the question, Betty, is to create the proper incentives. There's a version of an individual learning account that was trialed in Canada in the 80s and 90s. It was called Learn Save. I don't know if it still exists. The idea was to take people that were on social programs and to give them an account. And if those people saved, say, $1, they would get something like $3 from government to be used either for further training, higher education, or setting up a business. This was a rigorous trial, an impact evaluation, and it was very successful from the accounts that I read. people tended to use the system. They ended up getting the training and the jobs, but most importantly, I guess from the government perspective, it took people off the social benefits role. So it created more space and employment. And I think the reason it worked was that there were the incentives were aligned. The beneficiaries had to put something into the system, so they had to, as they say, put skin in the game and be accountable. The government that provided the funds was also interested in making sure that they got proper training, and I guess there were ways to verify that. I think the advantage that we have now is that such a system could work well with technology. So we don't want just the diploma, the piece of paper, but we want some way to demonstrate that people have these skills. And I think with technology, you could probably do that. It would be very expensive without technology for every time we hired somebody to have a test where they apply their skills. Very expensive assessment system. But maybe with technology, this could be done in a way that would satisfy employers that they have more than just the paper qualification, that they have something. But this will require some technology, and I think we are moving in that direction. I think we are good at measuring cognitive skills, but can we measure the other kinds of skills that people need? And I think that the answer here is that this is an evolving field, and we are still partially relying on self-reports. But I think if we can have systems that are affordable to demonstrate skills, it will build that trust that you mentioned. But people have to have an incentive. It has to they have to feel this. Otherwise, there won't be the incentive to participate or to take it seriously. So that it does build something that's beyond what we have now. Because otherwise, business as usual. There'll be another crisis in the years to come, and we'll be in the same place talking about the same issues. But something has to change system-wide and take into consideration that learning doesn't end with secondary school or with university. It has to be something that is part of the way that we do business. And I think incentives are required, and I think technology has to play a role.
You are talking about incentives to people. Giving incentives to people.
Yes.
What will be the incentives to companies that they should stop complaining about the inability of employees and the inability of the processes and start developing them, as we say, as I would like to say? What kind of an incentive would be for them? Because there was a proposal a few years ago that if the expenses towards training of their employees could be considered as an investment by IFRS accounting principles, then companies might be more motivated, let's say, and not just consider it as a cost. But again, they were saying that it is very difficult to predict the investment. I mean, the ROI of educating an employee is very difficult to predict it, because it is not like a machine that I bought it and I expect that they will produce faster or larger quantities or whatever. I train you because I believe in that. I have assessed you that you are missing this, and I believe that you will be a better manager or I don't know, a better operator or what. But it doesn't happen all the time. What it is needed there for companies to incentivize them? Accounting principles or something else?
Well, two things. I think what you mentioned, the appropriate financial incentive that makes it worth their while. But the other issue is the lack of information. And I think now we do have more information about the benefits of training and retraining. We know that employees that get training opportunities are happier employees, more likely to stay, more likely to produce. I think there's other benefits to employers for having motivated employees who are also interested in training and retraining. They tend to be healthier. They tend to reduce other costs to enterprises. So I think getting the information out there. I think when we were talking about lifelong learning in the 90s, we didn't have much information about some of these benefits. Now we know that not only does it enhance employment and make for more productive, satisfied employees, it also reduces some of the social costs of health-related costs. Lifelong learning through serious research has shown declines in mental decline in adults, reduction in the onset of Alzheimer's and depression and isolation, and the delay of cognitive impairment, all of which helps the bottom line, since these are more productive employees. So an information campaign is also required to help employers understand that it's in their interest that employees are better trained.
I think, yes, only the fact that we are going to live up until we are 100 or even 110 or 20, and all of us, we will be, let's say, healthy, apart from the fact that we are going to have dementia, it would be an incentive for all of us to continue in lifelong learning. It will be more important. Huh?
Correct.
So there is no specific time for lifelong learning and reskilling. It is just a habit, as it is the habit of walking, as it is the habit of healthy eating, etc. We have here a question from Washington, D.C., talking about remote working, Constantine. That this will change the level of benefits that employees will employees will be getting in the future. I mean, employers will, it is not easily written here, that's why anyway, I believe that it has can remote working substitute the trust and bonding that someone gets from personal connections? Apart from the fact that yes, there will be a huge change in working areas, in rents, in smaller places sometimes, in bigger places some other, whatever. I want the second part. I think it's more important, the trust. Do I need to be close to you to trust you? Or it is I am okay just seeing you. You are in Thessaloniki, I'm in Athens. We can meet whenever we like now.
I mean, it's a very challenging question. It also very much depends on personal idiosyncrasies. I equally know people who would say that working online and interacting online has actually proven to them to be more productive than the type of work medium that they had previously. But I also know of individuals who are basically feeling despair and really missing the type of social interaction that they previously had, now that they're being forced to telework continuously. So the best thing I can do is to go to science and reflect on available literature. And there are ongoing studies. I definitely wouldn't say that, I would say that the jury is still out on this, but there are ongoing studies on trying to see whether or not the quality of online interaction and whether or not the use of online communities can have positive advantages or can be comparable to face-to-face social interaction. My reading of that literature is that obviously, by engaging in virtual communities, by trying to learn and work online, there is something which is amiss. There are definitely elements which cannot be fully offered when you're just using virtual working and virtual learning. However, it's also not as bad as one would think. The available evidence does tend to show that, in particular with regards to youth population, the type of friendships and the type of engagements and the nature of the social interactions that they have via online communities, whether or not that's Twitter, Facebook, Slack, or any other type of modern interactive tool, which, we are probably also too old to know. They are quality interactions, and they do substitute and they do engage in a significant amount of exchange and knowledge accumulation and learning, as you would typically associate with face-to-face interaction. I also heuristically, whenever I'm asked these type of questions, I heuristically also think about the type of evidence that we collected recently at Cedefop, focused on online platform workers. You know that even before COVID, the platform economy has been on the rise, and an increasingly greater amount of people are now working by engaging through online platforms. So, from a study that we did between 2017 and early this year, where we were trying to identify their learning practices and whether or not they develop their skills, given the fact that their predominant mode of working is online. The type of evidence that we have is again encouraging, namely that there is a lot of skill development taking place. There are a lot of learning activities that they undergo. So, the answer to the question of the audience is, maybe there is something that will go amiss from not engaging in personal interaction, but there are also a lot of benefits associated with working remotely, not least the fact that you have greater access to ideas, the ability to interact with people without having physical barriers in place. And, the discussion that we're having today with Harry joining us from Washington and others potentially listening in to the rest of the world is proof of that, because otherwise we would have been in Athens or Thessaloniki or somewhere else, and it would just be a limited group of people who would be privy to this type of discussion.
It's a state of mind, I think, trust. It's intersubjective state of belief. As we are approaching to the end of our discussion, I would like to have from you all, what do you expect in a year from now to discuss as a successful story, to remember, to copy, to successful story that we have learned something, not just we are proud. And what is your dream towards which you draft plans to make it real? Because dreams without plans, they don't get real, and it's a disaster. So who would like to start first?
I'll go first then.
Okay, women are always braver. Always braver.
That's a very big question. Thinking about dreams and where we would like to be going and what we would like to be discussing. I think from an organization that works with the most disadvantaged populations across US, Australia, the Gulf countries, Europe, and so on. I think what we are looking for and what we would love to have is more resilient and flexible services that are able to adapt and able to respond much quicker than what we have seen so far. Because those who are the disadvantaged in a sort of a non-pandemic situation becomes even more impacted quite often in a situation such as COVID. So I think the sort of understanding by our overlords, the governments, the politicians, that there needs to be a discussion, there needs to be a conversation on designing services that are highly visible, that are accessible, that are flexible, and they are resilient. And I think that's kind of almost immediate takeaway from the last, 2-3 months of being in a lockdown. And I'm in London. I came on the last flight from Sweden. Nobody thought that Sweden will stay open, but my boss, who sits in California, told me, just get on the plane, be home. I want you to be safe, right? So sort of this took us so much by surprise that I don't think anyone was fully prepared. So take that experience, learn from it, and design better services, public services. That would be my wish.
Okay, so you started planning. First of all, you realized it, and I hope that you have started planning, Anya.
So from day one.
Okay, guys, who?
I can go first, Harry. But if you want to, please go ahead.
Please go ahead, Costa.
Okay. But there are two things I think that I would be very happy to see in a year's time from now, or even further down the road. I think one thing would be to see our society in general to have taken stock, of what the COVID crisis entailed. And what type of lessons we can draw from the COVID crisis. Some of those were nicely summarized by you, Ms. Kousia, at the beginning. Basically, a more in-depth understanding of what matters in life, a greater understanding of who matters as well in society. And I say this because before the COVID crisis, you definitely will recall that we were having all of these nonsensical discussions about how robots are going to take up all of our jobs and how we're going to be in societies where humans are not going to have any meaning. The COVID crisis, has proved that all of that was, mind my expression, baloney, and that we need to take stock of the importance of investing in professions which are going to be providing intense healthcare, social care, and that is the future of society. Working together with robots and working in harmony and in sync with digital technologies. The other personal ambition also is slightly related to our own country. Excuse me if I bring the discussion back to our own country. We know that Greece is a digital laggard, and we know that the future is digital. Unless individuals who, according to the OECD's PIAC survey, are classified as one of the lowest in terms of digital skills among OECD countries, unless businesses who, according to the European Commission's DESI index, improve the business operation, the digital business side of their operations, I see it very difficult for our own country to have a bright future in a world where, as I said, everything is going to be digital.
Thank you. And last but not least,
thank you. Thank you. I think, the day that my organization announced the home-based work, I was in a conference call on lifelong learning, and we were talking about how we might create more buzz for lifelong learning. And I think we have the ammunition now. I think we've learned one thing for sure is that it is possible to work remotely, but we've also learned that it's highly unevenly distributed ability, and there is scope for greater inequality unless we do something. And I think that something is a system of a lifetime education, but it does require some kind of transformation, perhaps radical transformation of the education and training system. So one hope, which I think is possible, is that we see a greater integration of technology into education systems, not as an alternative, not as an add-on, but an integrated part of how people learn and teach in a way to enhance the role of the teacher and to give students of all ages the opportunities to to learn and relearn and then use these skills going forward. So that's my hope that in a year we are one step closer to an actual lifelong learning system. Thank you.
I have to thank you all. I have to have as a last comment, apart from thanking you, the participants, the organizers, the AmCham, the employment committee members, and the audience, I would like to say that either we believe that COVID was real or we don't believe that COVID was real, or some people believe, we are talking about the opportunities that this event has given to us to discuss about what is going on and what is going to happen in the future. I mean, the discussion about what was real and what it was not, it's out of the question, because there are this kind of negativities as well, and I have to tackle them. I hope that we will not meet next year with you guys, that, as you know, we will have a second round after the vacation. I mean, after August, vacation time in our minds, because I think we will be working a lot more than we used before. We have also the social contract to discuss, and the social contract tackles remote working, tackles that the fact we have been using to be paid because we were going to our job. Now, I believe that we turn a little bit in being paid for the outcome that we produce, but this is a completely different question from different discussion from what we have been doing today. Thank you very much. Please provide us with your insights and your research, as you always do, but do it a little bit with more I don't know, intention, let's say, because we learn from you. And we really thank you all. Thank the audience and you, and you, and you.
Thank you.